Today, on this Thursday, we have a question to which the answer will depend on your state of mind, will depend on whether or not you are more of an optimist kind of guy or a pessimist kind of gal, based on what we have been seeing for about the first 6 months of this expansion as we have been getting closer to the release of 11.1. What you see in front of you is the official Blizzard roadmap of 2025, which we patchworked together with the roadmap of 2024 because it also included, of course, the release of The War Within by the very end of this last summer. Now, what has been mentioned recently as we have been getting closer to this patch right here is the fact that, well, from the release of the expansion to now, with the release coming at the very late August, early September, to the release of Undermined, which is planned to be presumably at the end of February, a month from now, maybe even a couple of weeks later, early March, from early September basically to March, we're talking about 6 months, right? So 6 months long for the first patch of the expansion. Now, players were pointing out how this was too long. Too long to just sit through 6 months of the same patch. Yeah, sure, the 0.5 and 0.7 mini content patches are nice, but we are just back to previous expansions and these long 6+ months long cycles, which is weird when you listen to what Green Jesus himself was saying about this new saga.
Having said that, we are working on multiple ways to deliver this adventure to you a little faster than you're used to.
And he was saying, we're gonna go faster. This was backed up even by other developers confirming that yes, we are planning to release patches on a faster cycle. We're trying to speed up the content release of every expansion. So of course, with all of this being said, when the first patch of the expansion lasts 6 months, you have to wonder, hold on a second, are we back to what basically we have been getting anyways up to now, which is 2-year-long cycles for each expansions, because we can get the first patch to last 6 months, we can get the second patch to last 6 months again, the third patch to also last 6 months, and then we get the usual meme fated season at the end of the expansion that we have been getting from Shadowlands to Dragonflight and possibly even now to stretch out the expansion to be 2 years long. So where did all the talk around faster patches, a faster patch cadence and faster cycling expansions go? We even had videos when this was being pointed out the first time, and there was the general consensus. One side was being more cynical and saying, well, Blizzard wants to give you the same content while making the expansions faster, so you have to pay for more upfront money every time an expansion comes out. So instead of having to pay some $60 every 2 years, now they're gonna make the expansions 1.5 years long, so you have to pay more often for the same amount of content. Others instead were taking the positive side and saying, well, if we can get the expansions by cutting out the last boring part of it, which is the fated season, that those last 5 to 6 months of basically nothing happening, for the expansions to come out faster, it's also gonna be better, because then the content will be cycling faster, will be fresher, and we will cut out a reasonably boring part of the expansion. So now we have pretty much at this point a confirmation that the first part of this expansion will be 6 months long, right? We can't really lie about this, we can't really speculate, because at this point it's pretty much guaranteed that this will be a 6-month gap between release to 11.1. Now, Blizzard, of course, through the roadmap of 2025, also gave us a much longer look at what's gonna happen, which seems to be, of course, on the same vein of what we've gotten so far, which is main season launch 0.5, 0.7 next patch, and then the patch 0.5, 0.7 next patch, and then the patch with 0.5 and 0.7, which would presumably lead to a next patch as well, right? So this cadence of content seems to be the exact same. And one of the things we mentioned since the release, which seemed to be consistent, was the fact that there was a gap of 2 months patch to patch, with the expansion, for example, having the early access and then the full release on the 26th of August. A couple months later, the 22nd of October was 11.0.5, and then the 17th of December, almost 2 months later, you had 11.0.7, and then a bit over 2 months later after this we should have 11.1 for the 6-month gap. If we gave this the same treatment between 11.1 and 11.2, you would have, just like between these two and then between these two and then between these two, you had constant 2-month gaps. If you gave this the same treatment to 11.1 and then from 0.1 to 0.5 and then from 0.1 to 0.7 and then from 0.7 to 0.2 and have 2-month gap, if 11.1 is coming out early March, then this would be coming out 6 months starting early March. It would be the end of August, so basically early September, which is still summer, of course. Also, don't get too phased by these seasons. After all, for example, literally the first thing you saw in the 2025 roadmap was wrong, because you see here 11.0.7 out in winter. Well, 11.0.7 launched the 17th of December. I know it might come to a shock to some of you, but the 17th of December is still autumn. It's not actually winter. So already, literally, first thing in the roadmap was wrong. So once you have this out and you're like, okay, now you have expansion to 11.1 is 6 months, 11.1 to 11.2, it's another 6 months. Pretty much we can guarantee this as well. So now the question is, what's going to happen after, as you enter 2026? Because now the question is going to be, with the entrance of 2026, you have the question of when is the actual midnight expansion coming out? Because according to the same 6-month gap we have been having, right, just like from the release to 0.1 and then 0.1 to 0.2, if we went 6 months forward again, we would be similar to this timeline by the end of winter, because September plus 6 months would be end of February, beginning of March, which funnily enough is the exact same point we are in here. Because of course 6 months plus another 6 months makes 12 months, which is a year. So it makes perfect sense to be right in the exact same position we were a year before, by the end of winter and the beginning of spring. That's where the debate would come in. According to the idea of wanting to have faster patch cadence, of being able to deliver the content faster, this expansion would be moved in earlier, right? This expansion would now be 18 months from the release of the first one, instead of 24. What happened in our last couple of expansions, and the reason why they were within during Dragonflight and Dragonflight during Shadowlands, it wasn't here, but rather it was an extra 6 months, was because what happened in here was the meme Fated season. So we had this extra 6 months gap that nobody really asked for and nobody really wanted, which added more time to wait for another patch. So this would have been 11.3 meme Fated season, right? That's what would have come out in here. That's what came out in Shadowlands at the end of Sepulchre, and what came out in Dragonflight as well with Season 4. And that's what would have stretched the expansion to come out further out for a 2-year cycle. 6 months from release to 0.1, 6 months from 0.1 to 0.2, another 6 months to go from 0.2 to 0.3, except 0.3 is a meme season, so you have to now spend 6 months waiting for the expansion during a season where you have basically no new content. You have no new raid, you have no new real actual content, increase of item level, besides just redoing what you just did the season before. We had some, change in Mythic Plus dungeons, sure, but it definitely wasn't that good or that successful of a season in both expansions, both Shadowlands and Dragonflight. So the question, now that we see the first basically confirmation, all of this up to here onwards is speculation. However, what we see here is the confirmed part, right? This left side is what we already have and already know exists. We already know the gaps of time from release to minor patch to minor patch to major release is going to be this one, pretty much. Now there is one tiny thing that might completely break these plans, these hopium-filled plans, really, of finally getting some tighter 18-month cycle expansion, which is the announcement that you see right here. Because right here, right at the end of summer, after basically 11.2 has come out, so according to our logic here, 6-month gaps, basically 6 months from 11.1, you get 11.2, and then you get the reveal of Midnight. Now, what is curious about this is, of course, that if we go back to our 2 latest expansions, so the War Within, which was released by the end of August and was announced on November the 3rd of 2023, meaning it was announced basically 10 months before the release of the expansion. And going back the expansion before in Dragonflight was announced the 19th of April to then come out the 28th of November of the same year. So about 7 months before the expansion actually came out. So, according to our big brain logic over here, if this is announced here, it should take 7 to 10 months before the expansion actually comes out, which would put it at coming out here a bit too early. This would be basically about 5 months after this expansion reveal, and this would be about 10 months after the expansion reveal. So we can say that, at least worryingly enough, based on the expansion reveal times of the previous expansions, it would have to be a bit of a longer wait before getting the actual expansion to be released. This one, I would say, is the current question mark we will have as we continue down this expansion, which will be quite dear to many players, whether or not this expansion will actually land on a actually faithful to what was mentioned at the beginning, even before the release of this expansion, of having faster patch cycles, a faster cadence of patches, which has been happening. It's definitely undeniable that these patches are nowhere near what we used to get as content patches in years past, right? Even if you go, depending on when you started to play, if you remember games, game versions like Mists or Warlords, but even Legion, honestly, and even Shadowlands, these mid-content patches actually giving you anything was actually quite unheard of. They didn't really use to give you much, these patches. All you cared about were the major content patches, whereas now we have been getting more stuff. This year it was definitely helped by the anniversary event, giving you more things. You got the Siren Isle, you got the Circlet, and a bunch more content available to you. Likely we are getting the same thing after Undermine launches with these mid-season patches, with, for example, the revisitation of the horrific visions from BFA. That, for example, was a major content patch feature, which is now coming back, except as a small mini patch, for example, or even whatever Nightfall content is going to be, for example. So that's gonna be the question mark for this timeline. When exactly do we want this patch to land? Do we want it after an extra 6 months of Season 4 of Fated Season, or do we want it early on? Do we want it to cut the expansion short to an 18-month cycle? So release Season 1, 6 months later we have Season 2, 6 months later we have Season 3, and 6 months later we have the next expansion. No Fated Season, no pandering for time in between, just release them faster, or just have more 6 months of nothing. There is also a small faction, I would say 0.7% of the player base, who actually believes this will be a proper, fully fleshed out Season 4. So an actual new zone, new world events, new dungeon, new raid, just like the previous seasons, which we haven't gotten basically since BFA. Shadowlands and Dragonflight cut the 4th season with the new content out completely, so it would be a new thing to have it back in this expansion. And also, based on what we have been hearing, of course, about it, the faster patch cadence, the shorter timelines between patches, it would be quite weird if right on this expansion we went back to having 4 full seasons. So it's definitely a very fringe, hipster, you know, want to stand out and have my unique opinion type of idea. Otherwise, most of the debates will be between this release timeline on a 2-year span or this release timeline on an 18-month timeline for the next expansion. Obviously, just for the record, I'm fully within this camp. I don't care much for a Fated Season, which doesn't really offer that much or nearly as much as a normal traditional season anyways. This has been our speculation video on the release date for Midnight, especially given now that we have basically possibly the first third of an expansion worth of timeline with the release of 11.1. We now know the release date of the expansion, the release date of the 2 mini content patches, as well as the probable release of 11.1. So we can start drawing some possible conclusions on the rest of the timeline for the expansion. So with this, out of the way, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, this is fine. It's a bit humid outside, but you know, the rain every once in a while with the sound of the rain on the grass in the back, it's a relaxing winter.